Welcome to another chilling tale, another descent into the heart of darkness. Tonight we dive into the eerie world of night shifts, those solitary vigils where shadows dance and silence screams. We're about to explore the rules you must follow if you find yourself alone in the dead of night, the only one awake within a sleeping world. Remember, every rule is crucial, a lifeline in the face of the unknown. Breaking even one could be your last mistake, a terrifying gamble with fate itself. Our story unfolds in a place where darkness holds sway, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and where the rules are all that stand between you and something sinister lurking just out of sight. So prepare yourself, dear viewer, as we unravel the unsettling truth behind the rules for surviving the night shift. These aren't just guidelines, they're whispers from those who've encountered the horrors that await and lived to tell the tale. And tonight's story, well, let's just say it's one you won't soon forget. Our protagonist, a young man named Alex, sat hunched over his desk, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He was used to the night shift, the silence broken only by the rhythmic tapping of his keyboard. Tonight, however, felt different. A strange, almost imperceptible chill settled over the office. Alex glanced at the clock, 11:58 p.m., almost time for his break. Must be getting tired. As he pushed back from his desk, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Had the shadows played a trick on him? He shook his head, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling that now clung to him like a shroud. He stretched, his gaze sweeping across the office. That's when he saw it. One of the fluorescent lights above his desk was flickering erratically. The flickering intensified, casting dancing shadows across the room. A shiver ran down Alex's spine. He had always hated the dark, the way it seemed to conceal unseen things, lurking just beyond the reach of light. He quickly got up and walked over to the light switch, flipping it on and off a few times. The flickering persisted, the light buzzing angrily. A wave of unease washed over him, a primal fear of the dark. He'd heard the stories, whispered among the night shift workers. Tales of strange occurrences, of unseen presences that lurked in the shadows. He tried to rationalize his fear. It was just a faulty light, nothing more. But deep down, a voice whispered, urging him to be cautious. He couldn't shake off the feeling that he wasn't alone. He retrieved a spare bulb from the supply closet, his heart still hammering in his chest. As he replaced the flickering bulb, he couldn't help but feel a pair of eyes on him, watching his every move from the darkness beyond the pool of light cast by the remaining working fixtures. He screwed the new bulb in tightly and flicked the switch. The light hummed to life, banishing the shadows. Alex let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He told himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of dread persisted. As the night wore on, the feeling of unease remained, a constant companion. Alex found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, his senses on high alert. The silence of the office seemed to amplify every little sound, every creak of the building, every rustle of paper. He tried to distract himself with work, but his mind kept drifting back to the flickering light, the way it had seemed almost deliberate, like a warning. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong, that he was being watched. He decided to take a walk, to clear his head. As he made his way down the empty hallway, the lights flickered again, this time more violently. He stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. The hallway was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the emergency exit sign at the far end. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling as he turned on the flashlight. The weak beam of light did little to dispel the darkness that seemed to press in on him from all sides. He hurried back to his office, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He could have sworn he heard something else, too, a faint shuffling sound, as if something was following him. He didn't dare to look back. Reaching his office, he slammed the door shut and leaned against it, his chest heaving. He fumbled for the light switch, desperate to banish the darkness. But as he flicked the switch, his blood ran cold. The lights wouldn't turn on. Panic surged through him. He was trapped in darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of his phone screen. He could feel his heart pounding in his ears, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He had to get out of there. But as he reached for the doorknob, he felt a cold, unseen hand grip his wrist. A scream caught in his throat as he was pulled back into the darkness. The light from his phone disappearing into the abyss. The following night, Alex found himself back in the office. He couldn't explain what had happened the night before, but he knew it had been more than just his imagination. The experience had shaken him to his core, leaving him with a deep-seated fear of the dark and an unsettling feeling that he was not alone. I can't afford to lose this job, not now, but something is wrong, terribly wrong. As he settled into his chair, his gaze fell upon a crumpled piece of paper tucked beneath the keyboard. It was a list, handwritten in hurried, almost frantic scribbles. Intrigued, Alex unfolded the paper and began to read. The words, scrawled in faded ink, sent a shiver down his spine. At the top of the page, a single line, underlined twice in bold. Rules for surviving the night shift. He scanned the list, his heart pounding in his chest. Each rule was more bizarre than the last, each one seemingly designed to combat an unseen, unknown threat. He had dismissed them as the ramblings of a tired and overworked employee, but after last night, he wasn't so sure. He reread the first rule, a chilling reminder of the previous night's terror. Always keep the lights on. He glanced at the clock. 11:55 p.m. He had made sure to keep the lights on, every single one of them, bathing the office in a bright, almost blinding light. He tried to focus on his work, to push away the lingering fear that gnawed at the edges of his mind. He jumped as the phone on his desk rang out, shattering the silence. He stared at it, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at the clock. 12:01 a.m. The second rule on the list flashed into his mind. Never answer the phone after midnight. His hand hovered over the receiver, his instincts screaming at him to ignore it. The ringing continued, insistent, demanding. Who could be calling at this hour? The office was empty, the building deserted. A wave of dizziness washed over him, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He felt a strange pressure in his ears, a buzzing sensation that seemed to vibrate deep within his skull. He couldn't explain it, but he had a dreadful feeling that something was terribly wrong. The ringing continued, each shrill ring amplifying his fear. He forced himself to look away from the phone, to focus on something, anything else. His eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking a distraction from the insistent ringing. But it was no use. The sound seemed to bore into his brain, driving him mad. His hand trembled as he reached for the phone, his better judgment screaming at him to resist. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the receiver. He could just ignore it, let it ring. But a strange compulsion, a morbid curiosity urged him on. He knew he shouldn't, but he couldn't help himself. Hello? Silence. He listened intently, but there was nothing but the faint crackle of static on the other end of the line. Hello, is anyone there? A chill ran down his spine as a voice, raspy and weak, whispered back. Don't hang up! The voice was close, too close, as if it were right next to him. Alex slammed the phone down, his heart racing. He stared at the phone in horror, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He knew he shouldn't have answered it. He had broken the rules and now he had to face the consequences. He glanced at the list again. Rule number 3 stared back at him, ominous and foreboding. If you hear footsteps, hide immediately. As if on cue, he heard a slow, deliberate thudding coming from the hallway outside his office. Footsteps. He was trapped. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a sickly yellow glow across the empty office cubicles. It was 2:47 a.m., the witching hour fast approaching, and a stifling silence had settled over the building. Even the usual hum of the distant freeway traffic seemed to have vanished, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I tried to focus on the blinking cursor on my computer screen, willing myself to believe that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down a primal fear gnawed at my insides. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy that sent shivers down my spine. It was the kind of silence that felt almost suffocating, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each thump a stark reminder of my isolation. The events of the previous night, the flickering lights and the unanswered phone call at midnight played over and over in my mind. They were just coincidences, I told myself, trying to rationalize away the growing sense of dread. But as the minutes ticked by, a new sound pierced the unsettling quiet, a sound that sent a jolt of pure terror through my veins. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, the distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing down the hallway outside my office door. My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by a paralyzing fear. I strained to listen, my ears straining to decipher the rhythm of the approaching footsteps. Were they getting closer? Or was it just my imagination, amplifying every creak and groan of the old building? The footsteps were slow, measured, as if whoever or whatever was out there was savoring the hunt. My eyes darted around the office, searching for an escape route, a place to hide. The room seemed to shrink around me, the once familiar surroundings now feeling like a claustrophobic trap. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. Then I remembered Rule 3. If you hear footsteps, hide immediately. It was the only chance I had. I scrambled out of my chair, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I dove under my desk, my body contorting into the cramped space. It was a tight fit, but I forced myself further in, pulling a pile of old files over me like a makeshift blanket. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The footsteps were getting closer now, each step sending a fresh wave of terror washing over me. I could hear the distinct click-clack of dress shoes on the linoleum floor, slow and deliberate, like the methodical ticking of a clock counting down to my doom. They paused outside my office door, and my breath caught in my throat. A wave of dizziness washed over me, a mix of fear and adrenaline making my head spin. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that whoever was out there wouldn't hear the frantic thumping of my heart. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved on. They continued down the hallway, fading into the distance until the only sound was the deafening silence of the empty office building. I lay there for what felt like hours, huddled under my desk, too terrified to move. The silence was almost as unnerving as the footsteps had been. It was the silence of anticipation, the silence of something lying in wait. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see if it was really gone. Slowly, cautiously, I extended my hand and moved aside a few of the files, peering out into the office. The room was empty, relief washed over me, but it was a fleeting feeling. I knew that I wasn't safe, not really. Something was wrong, deeply wrong in this building. And I had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. Rule number 4, etched into the very fabric of this forsaken building, was perhaps the most unnerving. It whispered to me, do not, under any circumstances, allow your gaze to fall upon the security cameras between the hours of 3 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. The very thought sent shivers crawling down my spine like icy fingers tracing paths across my skin. What could be so terrifying, so profoundly unsettling, that it could only reveal itself through the cold, unblinking eyes of those cameras during those specific 15 minutes? The mystery gnawed at me, a constant hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. I had to fight every instinct, every impulse to tear my gaze away from those monitors as the clock ticked closer to the witching hour. Ching. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable dread as the clock on the wall clicked past 2:50 a.m. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on me, stealing the very air from my lungs. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the silence of the building. I could feel my resolve wavering, the temptation to glance at the monitors becoming almost unbearable. What secrets did they hold? What horrors were lurking just beyond the reach of my vision? The suspense was agonizing, a relentless torment that threatened to consume me entirely. 3 a.m. The witching hour had arrived. I could hear it now, a faint, almost imperceptible humming emanating from the security monitors. It was like a siren's call, beckoning me closer, promising a glimpse into the abyss that lay hidden within their depths. My hand trembled as I reached for the remote, my finger hovering over the power button. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to look away, to shut off those monitors before it was too late. But the allure of the unknown, the forbidden knowledge that awaited me, was too powerful to resist. I hesitated for a moment, my breath catching in my throat, and then, with a trembling hand, I flicked the power button. The screens remained dark, but the humming intensified, morphing into a low growl that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. I leaned closer, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness, and then I saw it. A flicker of movement on one of the screens, a fleeting glimpse of something sinister lurking in the shadows. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but the image was seared into my mind, a horrifying spectacle that would forever haunt my nightmares. The hours crawled by, each one an eternity, as I anxiously awaited the clock to strike 6 a.m. The events of the night, the flickering lights, the ringing phone, the footsteps, and the horrors hidden within the security cameras had left me shaken to my core. I just wanted to escape this place, to break free from the clutches of this nightmare. 5:56, 5:57, 5:58. Each tick of the clock brought me closer to freedom, to the possibility of outrunning the darkness that clung to this place. 5:59. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm that mirrored the ticking of the clock. I could practically taste the sweet relief of dawn, the promise of safety that came with the rising sun. Just one more minute. But as the second hand swept past the 12, a chilling realization washed over me. The clock, the one beacon of hope in this desolate place, was malfunctioning. Instead of rolling over to 6 a.m., it remained frozen at 5:59. Panic surged through me, icy and relentless. I was trapped, ensnared by some unseen force that reveled in my terror. The air grew heavy, the atmosphere thick with a palpable sense of dread. I could feel it closing in on me, the darkness, the evil that permeated every inch of this building. I slammed my fist against the clock, a desperate attempt to jar it back to reality, but it was no use. Time itself seemed to be broken here, twisted and contorted by the malevolent presence that held me captive. And then, as if mocking my despair, the clock flickered back to life. But instead of showing 6 a.m., it displayed a horrifying message, 6:01. I had failed to follow the rules, and now I would have to face the consequences. The lights flickered violently, plunging the building into darkness. A blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps rapidly approaching. I was out of time. And there you have it, the rules for surviving the night shift. Remember, every rule is there for a reason. Our protagonist learned the hard way what happens when you break them. Stay safe, and until next time, keep the lights on.